Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'll be sharing information about the Cold War. During World War II, the United States and the Soviets fought together as allies against Nazi Germany. However, US and Soviet relations were never truly friendly. Americans had long been wary of Soviet communism and Russian leader Joseph Stalin's tyrannical rule. Soviet expansionism into Eastern Europe fueled many Americans' fears of a Russian plan to control the world. By the time World War II ended, most American officials agreed that the best defense against the Soviet threat was a strategy called containment. As a result, America's only choice was the long term, patient, but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies. The containment strategy also provided the rationale for an unprecedented arms buildup in the United States. In 1950, a National Security Council report known as NSC 68 had echoed Truman's recommendation that the country use military force to contain communist expansionism anywhere it seemed to be occurring. In particular, American officials encouraged the development of atomic weapons like the ones that had ended World War II. Thus began a deadly arms race. In 1949, the Soviets tested an atom bomb of their own. In response, President Truman announced that the United States would build an even more destructive atomic weapon, the hydrogen bomb. As a result, the stakes of the Cold War were perilously high. The first H-bomb test in the Enwattok Atoll in the Marshall Islands showed just how fearsome the nuclear age could be. It created a 25 square mile fireball that vaporized an island, blew a huge hole in the ocean floor, and had the power to destroy half of Manhattan. The ever present threat of nuclear annihilation had a great impact on American domestic life as well. People built bomb shelters in their backyards. They practiced attack drills in schools and other public places. The 1950s and 60s saw an epidemic of popular films that horrified moviegoers with depictions of nuclear devastation and mutant creatures. Space exploration served as another dramatic arena for Cold War competition. On October 4, 1957, a Soviet R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile launched Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite and first man-made object to be placed into the Earth's orbit. Americans were, of course, not happy about this. In the United States, space was seen as the next frontier, a logical extension of the grand American tradition of exploration, and it was crucial not to lose too much ground to the Soviets. In addition, this demonstration of the R-7 missile made gathering intelligence about Soviet military activities particularly urgent. In 1958, the US launched its own satellite, Explorer 1, designed by the US Army, and what came to be known as the space race was underway. But still, the Soviets were one step ahead, launching the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, in April 1961. That May, after Alan Shepard became the first American man in space, President John F. Kennedy made the bold public claim that the US would land the man on the moon by the end of the decade. His prediction had come true when Neil Armstrong of NASA's Apollo 11 mission became the first person to set foot on the moon, winning the space race for the Americans. In June 1950, the first military action of the Cold War began when the Soviet-backed North Korean People's Army invaded its pro-Western neighbor to the south. Many American officials feared this was the first step in a communist campaign to take over the world. Truman sent the American military into Korea, but the Korean War dragged into a stalemate and ended in 1953. In 1955, the United States and other members of NATO made West Germany a member as well, and permitted it to remilitarize. The Soviets responded with the Warsaw Pact, a mutual defense organization between the Soviet Union, Albania, Poland, Romania, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Bulgaria, that set up a unified military command under the leader of the Soviet Union. Other international disputes followed. In the early 1960s, President Kennedy faced a number of troubling situations, including the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Nowhere was this more apparent than in Vietnam, where the collapse of the French colonial regime had led to a struggle between American-backed nationalist Ngo Dinh Diem in the south and the communist nationalist Ho Chi Minh in the north. What was intended to be a brief military action spiraled into a 10-year conflict. Almost as soon as he took office, President Richard Nixon began to implement a new approach to international relations. He encouraged the United Nations to recognize the Communist Chinese government and after a trip there in 1972, began to establish diplomatic relations with Beijing. At the same time, he adopted a policy of relaxation toward the Soviet Union in 1792. He and Soviet Premier Leonid Brezhnev signed the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which prohibited the manufacture of nuclear missiles by both sides and took a step toward reducing the decades-old threat of nuclear war. Despite Nixon's efforts, the Cold War heated up again under President Ronald Reagan. Like many leaders of his generation, Reagan believed that the spread of communism anywhere had threatened freedom everywhere. As a result, he worked to provide financial and military aid to anti-communist governments and insurgencies around the world. Even as Reagan fought communism in Central America, however, the Soviet Union was disintegrating. In response to severe economic problems in the USSR, Premier Mikhail Gorbachev took office in 1985 and introduced two policies that redefined Russia's relationship with the rest of the world: glasnost, or political openness, and perestroika, or economic reform. Soviet influence in Eastern Europe waned. In 1989, every other communist state in the region replaced its government with a non-communist one. In November of that year, the Berlin Wall, the most visible symbol of the decades-long Cold War, was finally destroyed. By 1991, the Soviet Union itself has fallen apart. The Cold War was over. No matter how many years, the Cold War would always make an important part of American history. That's all for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.